The original Wii release of Kirby's Return to Dreamland has always felt like a particularly important game for the franchise. At the time it released, it had been in development in some form for over a decade, after multiple attempts at creating a new mainline Kirby game never reached fruition. That's a big part of the reason why Kirby's Return to Dreamland Deluxe, the Switch remaster of the 2011 original, feels like such a fitting way to wrap up the Pink Puffball's 30th anniversary celebration. It's a testament to just how much the franchise has grown and evolved since then. But how well does this classic Kirby game hold up after all these years? And is the new content added into this remaster strong enough to justify a full-price re-release? The first thing returning players will notice about Kirby's Return to Dreamland Deluxe is the updated visuals and presentation. While I was initially skeptical about the thick black border that now outlines all characters, it really grew on me over time, as it helps them pop from the background environments in a really satisfying way. The game looks outstanding in motion, and stages have substantially more detail and life to them than in the original release. It's a beautiful package that has clearly been crafted with love, and it feels like a modern Kirby game, rather than a decade-old Wii game, which is impressive. While there is some new content added to Kirby's Return to Dreamland Deluxe, some of it isn't accessible until the main story mode has been completed. Fortunately, the campaign is still a blast from start to finish. This time around, Kirby, and friends if you play it in multiplayer mode, are tasked with helping a creature named Magolor repair his airship, after a dimensional rift causes him to crash land on planet Popstar. While the story isn't the deepest in the world, as you'd probably expect, there are some interesting moments that take the plot in some unexpected directions late in the game, and that establish an interesting foundation for the new Magolor epilogue mode that's been crafted specifically for this remaster. The main story mode is certainly simpler in its direction compared to later entries in the Kirby franchise too. There are no massive suits of robot armor to pilot here, nor any of the mouthful mode shenanigans of last year's 3D game. Instead, Return to Dreamland Deluxe focuses first and foremost on tight, responsive platforming, and providing a huge range of copy abilities to let players experiment with creative ways to dispatch enemies. This remaster introduces two brand new copy abilities, Sand and Mecha. Both successfully expand Kirby's moveset in some fun new ways, but they are a small addition overall and they don't significantly change how the campaign will play out. Still, I was consistently impressed with just how great all of Kirby's abilities felt to use. They all feel distinct from each other with unique directional attacks for each one, and all of them feel genuinely useful in different situations. Finding new abilities while progressing through stages is a huge part of what makes Kirby games such a joy to play, and Return to Dreamland Deluxe certainly maintains that high standard of quality. Despite the simpler overall gameplay loop, Kirby does still have a few interesting tricks up his sleeve in Return to Dreamland Deluxe. Perhaps the flashiest are his super abilities, which grant him temporary, tremendously powerful attacks that fill the entire screen and damage swaths of enemies. These are often handed to players at the end of stages, and while they're a ton of fun to use, they basically make Kirby an unstoppable force, and so they're not particularly deep. Kirby also has a Super Inhale ability that, by holding down the B button, lets him suck up multiple enemies and blocks in a single gasp. Players with a puzzle-solving mindset will notice opportunities to use these skills to unlock alternate routes through levels, or obtain some difficult-to-reach collectibles. Kirby games have a reputation for being too easy for some players, and while it's true that reaching the end of a stage is usually relatively simple to accomplish, players who want to collect each world's energy spheres will face a tougher challenge for sure. In addition to branching routes through stages, there are also portals to another dimension hidden in many levels. These transport Kirby to optional gauntlet-style stages, in which a glowing wall of cosmic stardust threatens to crush him if he can't reach the goal fast enough. So players who want to see as much of the main campaign as possible will still have a lot of opportunity to take on tougher challenges before the final boss fight, although it never gets overwhelming. That final boss is no pushover though. Surprisingly, Return to Dreamland Deluxe adds some new accessibility features that can make the game easier if players so desire. A new Helper Magolor mode makes it so that Kirby can be rescued when he falls into pits, and will receive extra health items when taking a lot of damage. Items can also now be stored and used later by pushing the X button, and extra lives are now retained when the game is relaunched. These are little things, but I appreciate their inclusion, as it makes the package more approachable for some types of players, which is always a good thing in my book. It's worth noting that the entire campaign is also playable in co-op, in which up to 3 other players can now drop in and out of at any time. This has been tweaked from the original release. Now, everyone can play as a different colored Kirby, or they can choose to play as one of Kirby's friends, or enemies.
King Dedede, Meta Knight, Waddle Dee, and Kirby, and Kirby, and Kirby, and Kirby.
While I'm sure some folks will find this mode of play fun, my wife and I found that levels didn't really feel optimized for multiplayer play in the way that we had hoped. I disliked how the game would teleport players close to each other if one strays too far ahead, as it meant that we basically had to be always right next to each other in a stage, which, given how hectic later levels can get, wasn't always practical or fun. After beating the main story mode, a brand new single-player experience called Magolor Epilogue becomes available, and it's an excellent addition that expands the gameplay loop of Return to Dreamland Deluxe in some innovative ways. This 2 to 3 hour experience strips Magolor of all his abilities after the events of the main game, and tasks players with helping him slowly regain them by collecting magic energy and clearing stages. What's interesting is that players can decide which abilities they want to invest their upgrade points in, and in what order. Health, flying, attacking, and a wide range of special attacks can all be unlocked and upgraded over time. It's not very deep or challenging. This is definitely not an RPG or a Metroidvania style experience by any stretch, but it does shake up progression a little bit, and how players choose to upgrade Magolor will affect in what order certain stages become playable, so there are some fun choices to make. I wish it was a more substantial experience, as it feels like it wraps up a little too quickly for my taste, but it's a fun if inessential diversion. The other big addition to Kirby's Return to Dreamland Deluxe is its new Merry Magoland mode, which collects most of the minigames from the original release, adds in a few new ones, and packages them into a hub world of sorts. As Kirby plays the sub-games, he will earn stamps on stamp cards, with better performance resulting in more stamps and faster accumulation of rewards. Additionally, each sub-game now has its own set of missions to complete. These are criteria that require players to win a certain number of times, or, say, complete certain specific objectives in each subgame. Rewards for progressing through these paths include unlockable masks that Kirby and friends can wear in the game's other modes, of which there are frankly a shocking amount. Some of them even delightfully change Kirby's voice in-game. Players can also obtain souvenirs, which are helpful items that can be brought into stages in the main game, like health-restoring Maxim tomatoes and such. While I definitely appreciate that HAL has attempted to add new reasons for folks to play Return to Dreamland subgames with more frequency, unfortunately I didn't find any of the 10 subgames, not even the 2 new ones, compelling enough to want to play them dozens of times. There just isn't much substance to any of them, even with their varying difficulty modes. Essentially, there are 2 types of subgame present in this package, those based on reflexes and timing, and those focused on arena-style combat mischief. And while the 10 subgames all have different presentations, eventually I felt like I was just playing variants of the same few types of games and quickly lost interest. They just don't feel meaty enough to play for any length of time, and I think even kids will get bored quickly. The single exception to this is a new edition called Samurai Kirby 100, which is just so delightfully strange that it feels like it warrants a separate mention. Here players can play the Samurai Kirby minigame, which tasks players with reacting quickly to defeat their opponents in a single strike, against 100 other players. The catch is that while you can practice, you can only compete once a day. I couldn't tell you why this mode exists, but it is strange and it made me laugh each time I played it, so that definitely counts for something. Return to Dreamland Deluxe does have a few other modes that unlock after beating the main game, fortunately. Extra mode reworks the story mode to make it tougher, reducing Kirby's health, adding tougher and more dangerous enemies, and even adding a new boss. There's also an arena mode that essentially acts as a boss rush style mode, in which a single death will start players from the beginning. So players who fall in love with the game and want to replay it will certainly have plenty of content to dig into. The verdict? I recommend Kirby's Return to Dreamland Deluxe. Ultimately, even if some of the new content falls a bit flat, Kirby's Return to Dreamland Deluxe is still a compelling package and a great remaster of an already excellent Kirby game. New players will be experiencing an incredibly polished and refined Kirby campaign that becomes progressively more satisfying as its difficulty ramps up, and the new Magolor epilogue adds a few extra hours of new ideas and unique progression mechanics for a Kirby game. Return to Dreamland Deluxe is an excellent Kirby remaster for fans both new and old, and sets a high bar for whatever our pink protagonist's next adventure might look like. For more reviews, news, and previews, stay tuned to Nintendo Everything.